pretty interesting article I want to go over with you guys because there's a lot to talk about in this one. So the creators of Back to the Future will never, at least while they're alive, allow a reboot or a sequel to be made to the franchise. Personally, I think this is great. I don't want to see another Back to the Future. You know, the first time they did it was good enough. You don't need to redo it. I'm not a fan of reboots. I'm not a fan of like sequels that are done like 20 to 30 years later because they're really hard to do. Like that Ghostbusters movie coming out, it looks good. You know, how it plays out when it's made, I don't know how that's going to turn out, you know, but I'm willing to give it a chance. Personally, though, you did it so good the first time, I don't think it needs to be done. Like, there's a time and a place for everything. You know what I'm saying? There's a time and a place to do everything. And I think, you know, sometimes it's a pure cash grab. Like Star Wars, for example. The sequel trilogy was a huge mistake. It should have never been made. You know, there comes a time when it's just like, you know, we should just start over maybe. So here's what I would have done if I was going to make a sequel trilogy. I would have set it hundreds of years in the future. You know, that way, you know, the Luke Skywalker and all of him and his friends' adventures did have a conclusion and it was a happy one. But hey, after a couple hundred years, stuff can happen again. And then you can still refer to them as legends, you know. They're just too old, and look how it turned out. We didn't even get what we wanted anyway. I'd rather had nothing than got what we had. And it would appear that the creators of Back to the Future agree with me. So a little context before I go into what I want to talk about in this article. They're being interviewed for Back to the Future, the musical. So there's a musical play going on right now. And Bob Gale, at least, I don't know if Robert Zemeckis is, but Bob Gale, the writer, is involved with the production. And this was a way, he says, to give people something new without destroying what they already did. And during this interview, they ask some questions about, you know, rebooting the franchise or making a new film. And it seems like he's throwing a little bit of shade at Star Wars, which he actually does because he mentions Star Wars. But he also made a comment about how you treat your children, which I found pretty interesting because if you remember back, I don't remember how long ago it was, George Lucas gave some interviews about parting with Star Wars, talking about, you know, leaving your kids and your family. It's like a divorce. And, you know, he said something about seeing your kids with white slavers or something with Disney. He made some pretty interesting comments. So I want to read this part to you and tell me if this doesn't sound like he's just throwing a little bit of shade. Not a lot, but maybe just a tad. So let me go over this. So here's where it picks up. In a survey by The Hollywood Reporter in November 2018, more people said they would watch a new Back to the Future than a new installment from Harry Potter, Star Wars, Toy Story, or any other major franchise. Lots of people were clamoring, why don't you guys do Back to the Future Part 4? And it continues, but he and Robert Zemeckis, director and co-writer of the three films, had it written into their contracts with Universal that no new film could be made without their say-so. Studio bosses have tried their best to persuade them. All the time, Gale says, what can we do to convince you guys to do this? We said nothing. You'll make a lot of money. And he says, we already made a lot of money. I thought that was a pretty cool comment. Says, so here's what he had to say, and I thought this is a little bit of shade throwing. Not a lot, but a little bit. So listen to this. You know you don't sell your kids into prostitution. It was the wrong thing to do. We put the end at the end of part 3. And then he continues on to say, plus, Michael J. Fox isn't in the shape to do a movie. And nobody wants to see Marty McFly having Parkinson's disease. And nobody wants to see another actor playing Marty McFly if it's supposed to be a continuation. I 100% agree with that, actually. Because if you don't do it correctly, you can destroy the legacy of a character and what came before it. I think the new Star Wars trilogy hurts the old one, especially with Palpatine and what they did to Luke. It's hard to go back, and I did it recently. I watched the unspecialized editions, and it was fun to see, the movies that I remember them. But I got to tell you, especially with Return of the Jedi, you watch it end, and now that ending for that movie was forever kind of tainted. That Luke grows up to be a punk and all kinds of stuff. The sacrifice that Anakin made, I guess it kind of doesn't even make sense anymore. And they throw a little bit of shade right here. And they say, we've already seen the Star Wars movies, and Luke Skywalker is an old man. He grimaces. This can be a little painful, right? Perfect comment. It's true. Think about it. Ever since you were a kid, if you were a fan of Star Wars, you grew up watching them, and Luke Skywalker is this hero, and then you see him finally. He's back. And what does he look like? He's beaten up. Time hasn't been well to him. He's some hermit living in the middle of nowhere, abandoned who he was. He's no longer that hero. And that's one of the reasons that, I think The Last Jedi, that movie just damaged the brand so much. You see the response, Rise of Skywalker, they tried everything they could to get people to love that movie and undo it, and it still wasn't enough. And I think that the brand is damaged. Now, I actually think, though, thanks to The Mandalorian, the brand can come back, but you need to get away from everything surrounding the new stuff. You need to reboot into the future. That's why I like going back to the New Republic. I get it, but I would rather them go like hundreds of years into the future. Reboot with a Jedi Order rebuilt and start fresh. But, what can I do? They should just stop. They should just stop altogether, but they're not going to do that. It's a cash grab. And that's why I liked what they said here, where they're like, we've already made a lot of money. We're good. It's a really good comment. But yeah, I think a little bit of shade throwing at Lucas. Like, he's got plenty of money. He could have stopped. He didn't need to sell Star Wars. He already was super, super mega rich. So, yeah, he kind of sold his kids into a working lady life, didn't he? He did. And then throwing a little shade. No one wants to see old man Luke. It's like no one wants to see a broken down Marty McFly. I think that's a very great comment. So he goes on to say, we learned from the fact that so many studios have gone back to the well on some of their franchise properties too many times, and the audiences are disappointed and say, oh my God, they ruined my childhood. I 100% agree with that too. That's why people are so mad about Star Wars. Childhoods have been ruined. And it's not just the super older fans. Current generation kids have grown up on Star Wars too, and they've seen the same thing. We don't want to ruin anybody's childhood, and doing a musical was the perfect way to give the public more Back to the Future without messing up what has gone before. I think it should be come before, but so that's pretty much it. There's another article here, and they just take from the article I just read you and add some new stuff to it. But one thing they had in here that was pretty interesting is the only person that's open to a new Back to the Future that's part of the old crew is Christopher Lloyd. And you'll never guess how he would do a Back to the Future 4. He wants to get woke with it. Said Christopher Lloyd, who played Doc Brown in the original trilogy, is perhaps the only member of the family to break ranks, saying last year that he'd be happy to do a Back to the Future sequel, and that he thinks it should focus on climate change.
How dare you?
I'm sorry, Christopher Lloyd, but nobody wants to see that movie. And I really don't want to see a sequel or reboot at all. I wish, movies could just age gracefully. When you have movies that are so good and so well done that they hold up and stand the test of time, even with old effects like this movie, it still holds up very well. I don't want to see this movie remade. I don't want to see old man Doc Brown. I don't want to see old man Marty McFly. I don't want to see somebody else come and remake the same movie. I just want to have the original trilogy, and that's it. I don't need anything else. And I wish other, studios would listen to that, but they just want to keep going and grabbing our stuff and kind of just bastardizing it, Star Wars has suffered the worst from this, and I hope the series can bounce back, because I think that is one universe you can add to and do new things with. But I'd rather them go hundreds of years into the future and just reboot, instead of trying to cash grab on the original characters. But what can we do? Anyway, I do think that there was a little bit of shade thrown in here. Not a lot, but there was definitely some. I mean, he mentioned Star Wars. Old man Luke ruined, let's face it, Star Wars in so many ways. Anyway, that's it, guys. Let me know what you thought about this. What do you think about them throwing a little bit of shade? What do you think of the idea of them never doing another Back to the Future? Would you rather see one, or would you rather them not make it? Lend me your thoughts. Also, throw a like up if you would. Share the video. That would be very helpful as well. And make sure you hit that notification bell. Subscribe if you're new. Make sure you're still subscribed, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace. Also, if you want to help support the channel, check out my Teespring store. There's a link in the description. You can find some merchandise in there that you might want to check out. Also, take a moment. Make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. There's something going on right now, and they've been unsubscribing people. So just take a second and double check on that, and subscribe if you're new.